Welcome back to Your American Story. This is your host, Raja, and joining me right now is Rick Cancelliere, founder and CEO of Treatspace. Rick is a nationally recognized entrepreneur for connecting the dots between healthcare, design, and technology. The Small Business Association named him Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2006. In 2009, Rick launched Nerve Medical, a technology agency specializing in medical startups. Working with Project Olympus and co-founders at Carnegie Mellon, Treatspace spun out of Nerve Medical in 2012 with Rick as its CEO. Rich earned his bachelor's degree in marketing and finance from University of Pittsburgh. Rick will be pitching to our three investors, and the profile from our investors is there in prior episodes. And again, we have Ned Renzi from Birchmere, Mike Stubler from Draper Triangle, and Jim Jordan from PLSG. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the format. Rick will start off with a 4-minute pitch to our three investors. We know Ned's going to go first, followed by Mike and Jim. Each investor gets 3 minutes to use as they choose, either to provide feedback or ask questions. And the responses from Rick will be included in this 3-minute segment. And after the investor segment, Rick will have 1 minute to make a closing statement. Daryl Grandy, our radio producer, will hold out a yellow flag 1 minute out and a red flag when time's up. Rick, you have 4 minutes. Please proceed.
Raja, thank you for the kind introduction, and hello, Bulls. Thank you for having me on the program today. So Treatspace builds online health networks, and we drive practice revenues by doing so. And we did that, we started in that space by looking at legislative drivers that are creating a state of despair for medical practices today. We have things like the Affordable Care Act. We have things like the High-Tech Act of 2009 and meaningful use initiatives in stage 1, 2, and 3 today. We have Omnibus with HIPAA, and we also have the NCQA initiatives where they're changing the way quality is measured in healthcare practices. And what we see are medical practices that are scrambling, giving up and getting acquired, or they're heavily medicating themselves. And so we've seen a number of areas where medical practices are suffering, and the specific one that we chose to focus on to build software with is referral management. And the reason we chose referral management in one of our most recent new product launches is because about 10 years ago, it was very simple to send a referral. I, as a PCP, could send you, as a specialist, a referral, and there was not much work and effort tied to it. The patient got a note, and they went and found the doctor. Now, with new quality initiatives, there's not only just reimbursement risk tied to affordable care efforts, but there's also new workflow management that has to occur. So quality management has changed, and what has to happen is when I send a patient to a specialist, I not only have to refer based on quality measures as well as cost measures, but I also have to follow up with that specialist and make sure that my patient went. And then I have to make sure that I get those records back into my system, and I have to make sure those systems feed into our EMR system, our electronic medical record system. And so that process costs about $40 per referral. Imagine being a PCP 10 years ago and paying nothing for a referral that you give out. Now they're paying about $40 per referral. We want to drive that cost down with software, and what we've done is created a seamless process where we manage the decision support for the medical practice and choosing the referral partner, but we also manage the workflow on the back end electronically, and we take all that effort that used to be manual, like the 10 to 15 different either phone calls, faxes, or minutes spent on the phone to manage those workflows, and take those labor costs and drive them down. So we studied medical practices in 4 key segments: the employed segment, the owned, the independent segment. We also studied the specialty segments and the primary care specialists, and we decided to partner specifically with the primary care partners or primary care practices because we know that they're the center node and they can pull in the referral partners. And we can prove it too, because in the last two and a half weeks, we went out and we launched our first referral network with one of a large primary care practice here in the region. And we have within 2 weeks, we have about 10 closed accounts with signed contracts, with about half of them have already paid us. And if you know in software as a service, to get paid within a 2-week period is pretty rare. And so what we found is that right now we've created a business that scales nicely. It's what we call the holy grail in software as a service: low lifetime value or high lifetime value of the customer, low cost of acquisition. And what we're able to do is take a product that we're selling, provide it as an opportunity to investors like you and show our team, which is a very seasoned, experienced team in the healthcare domain. Our VP of Sales took our last company from 10 million to 200 million in revenues. We have a market size that is very large. When we look at the size of markets throughout or size of medical practices throughout the country, this is about a $100 billion marketplace that we're sitting in. And so we're filing 3 provisionals to protect just what we've created recently so we can lock it up later. And we're backed by Carnegie Mellon, the Pittsburgh Life Sciences Greenhouse, Innovation Works, the URA, and a number of experienced software as a service investors. So I invite you to help us move this forward and change the way patient care is managed.
Thank you, Rick. You just heard from Rick Cancelliere, founder and CEO of Treatspace, pitch to our investors in the Running with the Bulls contest in conjunction with Pittsburgh Life Sciences Greenhouse on Your American Story. At this point, we're going to turn this over to our investors. Ned Renzi from Birchmere. I want to turn this over to you right now, Ned.
Thanks, Raja. Rick, first of all, I just want to say kudos for the upfront cash collections. Most SaaS companies don't think about it. And as you build your models for fast growth, it'll dramatically reduce your cash needs. So congratulations on pulling that off so early in the life of the company.
Viral coefficients are important.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So there's obviously many stakeholders in the referral process. Maybe you could spend a little time telling us about the onboarding process for each of those stakeholders.
That's a really good question. That's probably one of the secret sauces that we have at this point. If we look at our competitive advantage, we've really studied the domain. We've sold into all 4 quadrants of the practices that I talked about: the employed, the independent, the specialty, and the primary care. What's really critical in this space is that we understand the primary care practices workflows. And we've noticed that they differ from multiple sites. So we actually have a service side of the business too, where we go out and we study the workflows of the primary care practices so that we can seamlessly integrate a solution into their workflow that works, because that is very important. If the workflow doesn't work, it doesn't work. And the specialists that are buying into the network and paying us for the services don't receive value. So we know that's critical. So we've gone and we've put that time in. We've hired consultants that are outside that have not only done EMR deployments, but done specific behavioral change management inside of practices to think through that process for us and take that to the specialists and make sure that that management is occurring.
Very good. And so you talked appropriately about your cost of customer acquisition. What is the cost of that sort of quote-unquote high-touch service to onboard the stakeholders?
So we charge a flat fee and that's one of the things that helps us decrease our payback period as well in the cost of acquisition. So we charge a service fee. We charge $400 a provider to train them and set them up and include that effort in getting them on board. And it's actually they're used to paying those types of fees for electronic medical record systems already. So it's not a lot to ask for them, and they've paid much more for services like that in the past.
Sure. And you've mentioned some specific numbers on your cost of customer acquisition and sort of directionally how well lifetime value of customer and churn rate and things. Any specifics you could provide on those numbers?
Not publicly.
Okay. I guess I'm done then.
Afterwards. We could talk later.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Ned. At this point, I'll turn this over to Mike Stubler from Draper Triangle.
Rick, I just wanted to understand one of the things you mentioned, that there's been regulatory changes that
Sure.
affect doctors and physicians in terms of referrals. Now, I'm not a big consumer. Thankfully, I'm healthy. I'm not a big consumer of medical services, but I'll just put it in real life. So 3 or 4 years ago, at my annual checkup, my PCP says, Mike, you should have a colonoscopy. He writes me a script for a colonoscopy, and he said, here's 3 different guys you might go try. I called, see who could see me, and I went and saw them and had a colonoscopy, and they sent the information back to my PCP. So what's changed in that whole process that makes this?
Well, there's a number of things that have changed. The first thing that's changed that's really interesting is if you don't go to one of those specialists, guess whose reimbursement gets cut by up to a couple $100,000 annually? Your primary care doctor is going to be affected. The Medicare STARS program, not one of the ones I mentioned, is aggressively watching quality scores amongst practices. So if you have non-compliant patients, what practices are doing is they're firing the patients. They're taking their records, sending them in the mail back to them, and no longer calling them a patient in their practice because they're not compliant, and it affects their quality scores. So what they need are tools to manage population health. And so what our platform does beyond just the referral management between provider to provider is we build in another product that's called Patient Network, where we pull in patients as well. We communicate with patients currently. Currently, we're only doing what we would call more social network things. We take a practice website, you can follow the doctor, and you can interact with the provider just like you would on a social network. So it's taking a Web 1.0 practice website to 2.0. But what we plan on doing in the future to address that issue is helping manage population health through creating those relationships with patients and pulling them in when necessary so they don't have to fire the patients.
And so what do you charge? How do you charge the practices? Is it a one fee per month, per year for all they can eat, or is it a transactional based thing based on the number of referrals that
We
they're
charge
doing?
a simple seat license per doctor.
And what is that
Currently, it's about $1,000 a doctor,
per year?
Mhm.
Great.
and it's upfront.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. At this point, I'll turn this over to Jim Jordan from PLSG.
Thank you. You know, we always like to say trying to find a problem that's important, right? So I'm trying to expand upon the concept of what the government's doing. So I know a little bit about a STARS system and the HEDIS system, and that's basically saying that physicians and hospitals get their annual increase in reimbursement, or their cost of living, for lack of a better word, based upon a quality score. Is that correct? Is that how it works?
Well, yes, there's different pieces to it. So it used to be that we were on a fee-for-service model. And that means as many services as I provide as a physician to you, I get paid for. We're slowly moving towards a fee-for-performance model. And these mechanisms that we're seeing now, STARS, HEDIS, and all these other areas, are mechanisms to measure quality. That's on the, there's pieces on the quality side, there's pieces on outcomes, there's pieces on patient satisfaction. For instance, HCAHPS now measures every provider in the country's patient satisfaction scores annually. There's all these things wrap up into an algorithm that justifies payment. And we want to move towards, and you're seeing things like ACOs form where there's full capitation in some of these areas where there's a number that's given per covered life to a medical practice, and that's all that they get. And the quality scores are what they're paid on instead of the number of services that they provide.
Okay, so the physician's motivation is to sort of understand that the the patient is actually flowing through, and so
Yes.
they don't get a chance to lose them. I also heard you mention in a prior presentation that there's $32 billion of leakage in the system. Can you tell me what is meant by that?
Yeah, so in referral networks, I talked about a use case that we're doing right now in independent practices. When you look at the employed practices, the leakages that they're suffering from, I talked about the independent practice losing about $40 per referral. The leakage tied to a health system is a much different story. It's when I have a health system and it's an integrated delivery network, I'm the payer and the provider, and I want to keep patients in my system, it's difficult to do without technology and software, unless you're managing that reference through software. So what our program enables a health system to do is lower leakage efforts specifically through software that manages that reference between providers and keeping something in the system. It's called KISS, keep it in the system.
Okay, good. One last question maybe. Why won't a big company do this? Why wouldn't a big company just sort of swoop in and do this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So there's electronic medical record companies that are flush with cash that are absolutely looking for new areas to enter into. But what's interesting is when you look at a provider that's using an electronic medical record system, for them to come in and solve a problem like this, they have to get all the other EMR vendors to play in their system. So there's 700 EMR vendors. It's very difficult for them to come into this marketplace and get any traction playing with their competitors in the same sandbox.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, investors. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard the Q&A sessions from our investors. And it's really rare that we have investors who are willing to have you listen to their due diligence. It's a great Q&A. And to find out what the investors decide, tune in on July 13th. And remember, the last time we had the Running with the Bulls contest. One of the investors, Roger Byfoot, invested $50,000 on the air. Rick, at this point, I'm going to turn this over to you for a 1-minute close.
Thanks, Raja. So in our first year, we turned a $25,000 pre-seed investment into a 6-figure revenue stream, of which a high percentage of it was annually recurring. This year, we're going to take that times a multiple of at least 8x times that revenue. So we're at exponential growth in our second year, because we've gone after a viral growth model with a different product that also allows us to expand and sell our previous products as well. So there's an annual revenue per user piece that we can sell into with our product. And we've closed, just in the last 2 weeks, about $50,000 of new business. And we have a good $1.5 million in our pipeline with 2 very active sales folks and a VP of sales going after enterprise efforts. So we believe that an investment of $50,000, just like Roger made last time, would get at least a 12x multiple based on a previous acquisition offer we've already had for our business. And so that effort alone tells us that we should be working with investors that have experience in our industry, SaaS software, and health technology. So thank you.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, investors. Ladies and gentlemen, the mission of the radio show is to participate in making an impact on jobs and the growth of our region. And you too can make an impact by going to our website and voting. If you liked what Rick Cancelliere had to say today, go to youramericanstory.com and cast your vote for him. The winner of the audience award gets $2,500 cash. And if you like what Rick had to say, go to youramericanstory.com. We are going to go to a commercial break. Again, thank you, Rick. Thank you, investors. This is your host, Raja, and I'll be right back.